First thing the person wants to do is research on their own. Don't just believe your doctor. The medications are being used to cover up your symptoms. You have not yet found the source of your problem. Medical doctors have become nothing more than salesmen of the drug companies. You know, in so many different states, it's illegal to say you can cure different diseases. It's the most outrageous thing I've ever seen. And who says that? It's the big pharma saying, you can't say you can cure this because I want people to take this drug.
Welcome, Dr. Biamonte. Did I pronounce that properly? I hope I did.
Sure. Good enough.
Good. And let's see, you're the founder of the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition and co-creator of BioCybernetics. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and how people could learn more about your expertise.
Well, when I first got out of naturopathic school, it was back in the early 80s. It was 84. And I had this idea. Now, personal computers were just coming out. So I had this idea to take all the knowledge I had on interpreting blood workup and putting it into a computer, so I didn't actually have to go through it. The computer would do it. And I had studied Ken Brockman and Jim Sema and a lot of the guys who were like somewhat alternative interpreters, let's say. Like Ken Brockman could look at a standard blood workup and he could tell you things about your nutrition and your glandular function that no medical doctor could, because they didn't know the physiology that in depth. So I was running around with my business cards, going to all these health food stores, telling them what I was doing. And this woman told me, well, you know, you should speak to Bob Santoro. And I said, who's he? And she says, well, he's at Grumman Aerospace. He's a naturopath, and he's already got a computer like you were describing that you wanted to create. So I called up this gentleman, and I found out that he actually was the person who developed the life support systems on the LEM. But he had a very strong background in physiology, naturopathy, and nutrition. So I went to visit him, and he got me very quickly. We had a great rapport, and I became interested in helping him with the project he had, which was developing a computer model of the body. And they were going to use this model at NASA to analyze the astronauts to see about their calcium requirements and their nitrogen requirements when they're in extended space missions. So I worked with him for many years, maybe about 7, developing this computer model. And we eventually took it public and started to use it in our practices, and had a lot of other doctors sign up to use it in their practices. And it was a pretty amazing thing because it had thousands, like 8,000 algorithms. It was based on, actually, if you could imagine this, if you took Guyton's physiology book and Harper's biochemistry and you loaded them into a computer so that it would do everything in sequence, that's basically what this software does. So if you give it data on somebody, you can give it the results of a blood test. You can even give it acupuncture points that are typically treated, or you can give it data from a chiropractor on what he normally adjusts on this person, and the computer will start putting together pathways and tell you what's happening with this person's physiology. So this is all going fine. And then we started to note that about 30% of the people whose reports we were running had strange things going on. They had weird reactions to the vitamins. And when we investigated them, we found out they also had weird reactions to medications. And nobody could figure out what was going on with these people. So I decided to volunteer to figure out what was happening with this group of people. There was about maybe 90 people. So I had this big file of folders on my desk, higher than my head. And I was going through these folders looking for common denominators. And I found a particular pattern in their white blood chemistries, which would indicate a possible infection in their colon of some kind. I didn't know what kind, but of some kind. So I had all these people do microbiology stool tests, and they came up having candida. Now, I didn't know at the time really what candida was. So I was so ignorant, I told them, look, the test shows you have candida. That's a fungal infection. That's about all I knew, in your intestinal tract. I said, go to your doctor, tell him you have this, have him cure you of this, and then come back to me, and we'll put you back on the nutrition program. Well, I got the darndest phone calls after that from these patients. I got calls. The doctor said there's no such thing as candida, or the doctor says everybody has candida. The doctor says candida is not a big deal. The doctor says I must have AIDS if I have candida. The doctor says, well, I don't see you with a vaginal yeast infection, so how could you have candida? All these stories like this. So I said, boy, this is not going to work. So at that time, there were two functional medical doctors in New York City, probably the very first two, who I had a relationship with. Robert Atkins, who we now know as the Bob Atkins, and Ronald Hoffman, who was a friend of mine. So I told these patients, go to Dr. Atkins, go to Dr. Hoffman. They'll know about this. They'll cure you of this, and then come back to me. So they went. A couple of months later, they all started coming back, and they said, well, this was much better. They said that he knew what you were talking about. They knew about candida. And they put me on these drugs, and I was doing really well for the first month. And then all of a sudden, my symptoms all started coming back, and the drug didn't seem to work anymore. So I said, I have to figure this out. So that was probably 1989. And I've spent these years since then learning about candida and learning about the tricks that it pulls and how to outsmart it. And the first thing that I learned was, in order to figure it out, I had to reverse engineer everything I was hearing from these people. So when they started telling me that they were on the drug for a month and they were great, and then all of a sudden it came back, I started to look into candida's ability to mutate and become drug resistant. And sure enough, I found that in order to really treat candida, you have to rotate the antifungals that you take. You just can't take the same one. Mm-hmm. And then I started to collect textbooks on candida. And one of the textbooks explained that after 21 days of being exposed to the same medication or herb or whatever it is, candida starts to mutate against that. And it no longer will be effective. So I said, how is that? That's exactly what these patients are telling me. And with each story that I started to hear from people, I reversed engineered it. So I would have people come and tell me, well, I saw this doctor up in the Bronx, and he told me to stop all my antioxidant vitamins when I went on his South American parasite killers, because he said the antioxidants will block the effect of the herb. I said, well, that's interesting. So I looked at that. Same thing would be true for candida. I found that because most drugs and even herbs that try to kill candida do it by creating oxidative stress against the candida, if you were taking high amounts of antioxidants, it would block the effectiveness of the drug. It would stop it from working. So I continued in this fashion for about 2 years, collecting all this data. And that's when I started to really outline my protocol based on all this. I would have patients come in and tell me, doctor gave me hundreds of dollars worth of probiotics. I took them for a day or two. I felt okay. And then I just started having gas and bloating, and it was a waste of money. So I went back to the textbooks, and I found that when candida is present, probiotics can't stick to the gut lining. They're repelled by candida. And it actually causes an allergic reaction. If you have leaky gut syndrome and you take probiotics, you actually get allergic reactions to the probiotics. So this is how I proceeded in this fashion, collecting all this data and then putting my protocol together, which I think eventually, to me, sounds like it's common sense. But then again, I know all this material. I looked through it. So.
Well, you've been doing this a long time, and you've probably seen changes in the health of our humanity, the patients you're seeing and our societies. What are your thoughts on the major cause of the increase in illness that we're seeing?
Seed oils are a major increase, as Bobby Kennedy Jr. is saying. Seed oils are major. Seed oils do most of the things that sugar and cholesterol have been accused of doing, and they really don't do it. It's really the seed oils that cause so many problems. And then we've also had interesting issues with food, the quality of the food. For instance, I have patients with candida who can go to Europe and go off the diet and do reasonably okay. And the minute they come back here, they go off the diet, they're back in bed. Because in Europe, they have mostly organic, non-GMO foods. GMO foods are mostly banned in Europe. And I have found that aside from antibiotics and other medications that can cause candida, if a person eats strictly total GMO diet, they'll get the GMO foods will actually break down their flora and cause candida.
Is there a battle going on in our guts and maybe in other spaces of our body, but primarily the gut, between candida and other microbes?
There's a battle in the sense that candida battles with your normal flora, your healthy normal flora of bifidobacteria and lactobacillus bacteria. Candida is a cohort with many other pathogens. You commonly will find candida with Klebsiella pneumoniae and Citrobacter, which are two really nasty bacteria. It's common to find Staph aureus in the gut of people with candida, and many different protozoa like Blastocystis hominis you'll find with candida. So I would say that's a synergistic relationship they have.
You're saying that we're seeing a lot more candida than we have in the past, and secondary to the GMOs and seed oils that we're all being inundated as healthy, or is it just there and we're consuming it and it's being pushed to the public as healthy, but in fact it may be the thing that's harming most of us?
Yes, that's true. We're coming to the tail end of that though, because awareness is coming out now. Even before Bobby Kennedy was making this stuff known, there are apps you can buy now for your phone that tell you restaurants who use seed oil and restaurants who won't use seed oil. And there are books about seed oil now in terms of how it destroys your pancreas, how it can destroy your flora, the rancidity of it, how it can cause many illnesses. As I said before, seed oils cause what cholesterol and sugar have been accused of. But when you actually look at the statistics of when seed oil was introduced in the population, its increase and the rise in other diseases, you'll find that they parallel each other perfectly.
Is there a rise in thyroid dysfunction over the years?
Yes, there is. And that partially is due to seed oil. It's also due to mercury exposure. This mercury will directly settle in the thyroid. It will store in the thyroid and cause many problems, as you can imagine.
Dysfunction of our brains?
I would say that's true, and that's probably true with seed oils. And it's also true with toxic metals, because there are a lot of toxic metals that store in your brain that cause dysfunction, like aluminum. So I would say that's true. But as I said before, we're probably reaching the tail end where this stuff is, because the public is becoming more aware of these things. The curve is starting.
And how can people identify these problems? And I imagine it kind of goes down the list of all of their symptoms of autoimmune diseases, of gut diseases, or joint diseases, and those sort of things. Where would they go in the sense of, you mentioned testing. Can you maybe talk a little bit about testing that people might look towards, or ways that they can identify they may have these problems?
First thing the person wants to do is research on their own. Don't just believe your doctor, because the big pharmaceutical companies have people on drugs that they don't need. There's no such thing as a drug deficiency. There's no Ozempic deficiency.
Yeah.
All the people on drugs are taking drugs to cover up symptoms they have because they're not getting to the cause of the problem. First thing people need to do is research on their own their symptoms, see if they can make sense, because there's more than enough data on the internet. And then they want to try to find an alternative doctor who can qualify and document whether or not their suspicions may be correct. But just keep in mind one thing: it's a stable datum for me. Regardless of what your disease is, and regardless of what your medication is that you're taking for that disease, you don't have a deficiency of that medication. The medications are being used to cover up your symptoms. You have not yet found the source of your problem.
Why do you think we doctors in general in standard medicine are not listening to these I'm going to use the word alternative ideas, naturopathic ideas? Maybe there's a better name for it.
I understand you.
Yeah, but I'm trying, I think that this is one of our problems in standard medicine is, and I know I went into medicine to help people. I was taught the language of modern medicine, but really it took me suffering and realizing that standard medicine wasn't working.
Well, you were taught a couple of things that you and your student colleagues joked about probably in the lunchroom. You were taught the number one rule is you never kill the patient. The number two rule is you never cure the patient. Because if you kill him or you cure him, he's gone. He's not there to take your prescriptions anymore. So there you go. Big Pharma dictates what's going on. The old story, whoever pays the piper calls the tune, is what we have that's going on. The drug companies, medical doctors have become nothing more than salesmen of the drug companies. And they've lost track. In so many different states, it's illegal to say you can cure different diseases. It's the most outrageous thing I've ever seen. But you can go through each state, and each state there are laws saying that it is illegal for you to say you can cure this disease. And who says that? Who the king is king because he says so. It's the big pharma saying you can't say you can cure this because I want people to take this drug.
So really, it's about helping people define the symptoms, disease, and look towards alternative ideas that are now, I think, being expressed in more amazing ways because of social media.
Yes.
You've been doing social media how long, and what are your thoughts on how valuable the stories are?
Well, I've been doing it since 2008, and I've seen an evolution take place where a lot of the things that I read about 20, 30, 40 years ago made their way to social media, and people are now starting to accept these concepts, like illness and death begins in the gut. Most people nowadays are understanding the relationship between the gut and your brain and other areas of your body. They're understanding inflammation better, that inflammation is the underlying source of a lot of illnesses. And where does the inflammation come from? Well, it comes from seed oils a lot of times. It comes from GMO foods. It comes from all the toxins. Just what was it a few days ago? I think right before President Trump got in office, they suddenly announced they were removing red number 3 from the food. And Bobby Kennedy has been saying red number 3 was a cancer causing agent for I don't know the last 15 years. So they suddenly decided to remove it. So people are becoming more aware as the truth hits.
Is treating candida with diet or other herbal medicines or other antifungal agents? Where is there a mixture of it, or do you think there's a better direction people should look at?
You can't treat candida with pharmaceuticals, and the reason why is the length of time you would have to take these various pharmaceuticals to completely eradicate candida. It would destroy your liver and your kidney function. So the only option that I know of is to use nutraceuticals or phyto-herbal combinations. Herbs are safer. Herbs get the job done, and they don't have the side effects. And that's why I have to go with a strictly herbal approach with it.
Any thoughts on fasting and how it may be helpful for people's health?
Well, with candida, fasting can be helpful, but it's not the solution because of the way candida grows in your intestinal tract. It grows, if you looked at it under a microscope, it literally looks like broccoli, and it grows roots into your tiny blood vessels. So as long as there's glucose in your blood, candida will stay alive.
And so is there a dietary regimen that you recommend? We're eating, Atkins diet and
Every
keto and
candida
paleo.
diet, every candida diet has a few things in common.
Mhm.
Number one, it's got to be low in carbs and low in sugar because that's what candida feeds on. There's no magic food that helps you get rid of candida. Like there is not a list of foods that you eat that help you get rid of it. There's a list of foods you eat that make it worse and contribute to it. But basically, every candida diet is more of a carnivore diet out of necessity, because candida can't feed on proteins, it can't feed on meat. When you do a carnivore diet, there tends to be a general balancing of your entire body, which actually aids you to get rid of the candida. It helps as a side function. But the key thing you don't want to do is feed it and make it worse. It's like being in war. If you're in war with an enemy, you don't want to help them by feeding them. You want to cut their supply lines off so that they starve and they're more amenable to giving up.
Yeah, I always found that fasting can help, but adding fat. And I'm just curious, have you ever noticed that butter never molds?
Real butter, yeah.
Yeah, and butter or lard or fat, it doesn't mold or go rancid easily.
It also helps control your appetite. So the people on candida diets won't get crazy cravings for carbs if they have a high enough fat diet. No, basically, I'm telling you something you don't know here. But a keto diet very, very often doesn't work because the person doesn't have enough fat.
Right.
Sometimes it's not just eliminating the carbs; it's the addition of fat that then gets you into ketosis.
Well, I think the reason we're here discussing, because I want people to hear your point of view, which I think there are a lot of people that would resonate with what you're saying. And now with our new government in place, and hopefully the people will be inspired to do more work on their own and do the research.
I would hope.
That's and I believe that the presentations of what you're doing and others in social media, it gives people access, because I know, let's see, you went to a school of naturopathic medicine and had to get accepted to it.
Yep.
And I had to get accepted to a allopathic medical school. And so you had no access to this knowledge easily way back when. Today, everyone has access to this information.
Yes. When I went to naturopathic school, there were so few schools that the school I went to, you had to do a lot of at home study. They sent you the material to your house. And then once a month, they had a teacher fly in to a local airport. They put on seminars and they tested you on everything you learned that whole month when you were home. And I learned rather quickly. There's no internet back then. I learned quickly the only way I was going to get through this curriculum was to get up every morning and take all my material and go to the public library, because what I had at home just wasn't enough. So I spent years every day in the public library getting through this material.
Can you tell those listeners that may not know what a naturopath is and why you chose naturopathic medicine over standard medicine?
The word naturopath actually was coined by Hippocrates, who's the father of medicine. And naturopath means nature cure. The intention of Hippocrates, who was the first naturopath and the first physician, was that you should be cured through nature. Nature should cure you. And that should be done through food and plants and things like this. I chose this over allopathic medicine once I learned the whole game with allopathic medicine and how it all started. At one time, naturopaths were the major doctor. Like your old country doctor was a naturopath. But as John D. Rockefeller started to investigate medicine, he started to find out that he could take his leftover coal tar dyes and all these leftover junk that he had, and they could mimic the active ingredients in herbs. Like one of the first herbs was foxglove. And the active ingredient of foxglove they mimicked, sequenced, made synthetically, and it became digitalis, which is a heart medication. But what doctors were seeing is that it didn't always work the same way, because in nature, we like to think that there's a balance. There are other things that are in the herb that keep it from working abnormally, where if you just take the active ingredient stripped down, it doesn't always have a proper balance, and you never know if it might be working in a harmful way.
Are there any parts of the standard dietary advice we're given besides the GMOs or the seed oils that you think maybe are a big problem, such as what children are eating in schools and those sort of things?
Well, Bobby Kennedy's going to handle that. That's first on his list. But let me tell you another interesting statistic. Since the American Heart Association has been pounding their recommendations into society, heart disease has gone sharply up. So when I look at these things, I often say, well, then I must do the opposite. If they're telling me to do this, and this is the statistical outcome, I should then do the opposite of this. And sure enough, when you look at the American heart disease diet, it's high in polyunsaturated fats. It's high in basically rancid fats and fake food, as opposed to eating a diet, which was what I would tell people to do, is look at your blood type. If you look at your blood type, you should be eating a diet per your blood type and then making sure those foods are organic and non-GMO. And if you're doing that, you're doing about as good as you can do.
Do you think that fake industrial made meat is something that we should all look towards as healthy?
Yes, we should all look towards throwing that in the garbage and throwing the inventor of it in the garbage also. I have no love for Bill Gates. So
why are we all so gullible and thinking that these ideas that cows are somehow ruining the world and fake meat is going to solve it?
I really don't know. I think it's a matter of people not having as a personal exercise in their life, having to sort through things and just being satisfied with what they're being told by an authority. But when you start listening, when you start hearing somebody tell you that he has to put a drug in cows to stop them from farting because the farting is increasing global warming, this is where you might want to consider that maybe this is not so on the mark.
Is it the Rockefellers and the direction of how the few can make the most money out of the many,
yeah,
and extract it from them, causing the most suffering, and then funding the wars of the world and the war machine,
right,
which is churning humanity into a mess?
Well, you know, the more you look at conspiracy theories, the more you find they're true. And when you start following them around the tree, you see, well, you got big pharma and big food. So big pharma gives you this bad food that makes you sick. That refers you over to pharma, because now you have to take drugs to handle your symptoms. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Eat bad food, get sick, have to take drugs. So this is basically what they want. This controls people. It keeps people down. It keeps us working for them.
And do you think we've also been misled to believe it should be easy and you should take the easy way out? And that's really the message that we've been given, that, oh, here's a pill, a dissection, a doctor that's going to take care of you.
Well, I had a conversation the other day with a patient who was asking me to prescribe all kinds of antidepressants for them. And I asked, what is the problem? What is the stress? And it was, they don't like their neighborhood and don't get along with their boss. I said, well, you can move out of your neighborhood. You can get a different job. I told her, well, my grandfather came here from Italy in the early 1900s. He came here, and there was prejudice against Italian people back then too. Just like in every civilization, there have been slaves. Blacks, Africa, are not the first group of people who were slaves. Just about every ethnic group at one point or another was slaves on this planet. But I was telling this person, my grandfather came here. They didn't want to give him a job. The only people who would hire him were the other Italians who were already here. He had 3 jobs. He worked a day job. He worked at night. He worked on the weekends. He didn't go asking for pills because he was being oppressed or he had to work so much. It would have been the last thing in his mind. He was thinking, how am I going to work and make money to put food on the table to feed my family? That's what he was thinking. So when you get these people nowadays, I have to take a pill because my neighbor doesn't like me. That's it's unfortunately the drug companies, the drug culture, going back to Mother's Little Helper that the Rolling Stones would sing about. That's what's formed this.
Well, when I look back to my medical training and realizing that our job was to diagnose your disease based on a code, and then there was usually a drug treatment for you. And it never included meditation, acupuncture, nor nutritional science. It involved a drug and occasionally a dissection and a specialist that is going to take care of your disease for the rest of your life. Because once you've been diagnosed with it, it's your label.
Quite a racket. Thomas Edison said, "The doctor of the future shall give no medicine, but will educate his," I'm paraphrasing him, "will educate his patient as far as diet and other health concerns that he can do on his own." Thomas Edison was pretty smart.
I think so. Are regular exams in medicine, in regular testing in allopathic medicine helpful, do you think?
No. A lot of these things are shams or scams that are set up to keep the patient in the loop. It doesn't mean a person should never go for an exam, but like going for your exam, your yearly exam or things like this, a lot of it is a way to come up with some excuse to put a person on a drug, is my opinion. I think that if people are aware enough themselves, they themselves should be able to order blood work on themselves based on research that they do. I don't think that the problem is we have been brainwashed into bowing to authority or believing authority beyond belief.
And we have seen what that's done to us over the last number of years. And I think we're seeing the changes that we can all implement on our own. Are there specific tests you think anyone should be getting on a regular basis, or
Yes.
just specified any particular things? Would you?
There
comment on
are
that?
a few tests which I think people should be getting on a regular basis, but this will never happen because the drug companies, well, I'm not going to say it will never happen. It will not happen easily because the drug companies will lose too much money. One of the tests is a very simple test. It's a hair mineral analysis. A hair mineral analysis will tell a person if they're exposed to any toxic metals. And it's my opinion that 50% of all the people diagnosed with an illness and on a medication have that illness due to having some toxic metals in their body. Same thing could be true of toxic chemicals. So I'm technically a clinical ecologist. That's really what I practice on a day-to-day basis, is clinical ecology. And the testing that I do on people often reveals many different types of chemical toxicities in their body, and then metal toxicities. The metal toxicities are more interesting because the metal toxicities interfere with the person's ability to detoxify the chemical toxicity they have. So when I look at it in order, I have to handle the medical toxicity first, so then the person can possibly detoxify the chemical overload that they have. So if a doctor was testing the person every year, testing their hair, he would pick up on toxic metal exposure. He'd pick up on any mineral deficiencies that the person has that they don't know they have, that are causing God knows what. And then if he's also tested for exposure to mold and different chemical toxicities, that would be a whole different world, because there are so many people now out there who are exposed to mold, who have what we used to call sick building syndrome going on, where they're being exposed to mold and the mold is making them sick. And the thing about it that can be tricky is when you go to a house that has mold and you interview the people that are living there, if you have 6 people living in that house, 1 or 2 of them is severely affected by the mold. The other people, not so much. That 1 or 2 are the people who have chronic dysbiosis or chronic candida. They're more affected by the mold. But to stay on track with your original question, if doctors were testing people for exposure to environmental illnesses, environmental toxins, that is a far greater, let's say, approach, because that's what people are suffering from. People are suffering from illnesses they're getting from their environment, from waste, toxic waste, from toxic metals that they're ingesting, from toxic molds. That's what most people are suffering from.
What about a stool sample and cultures, or looking at toxicities in stool?
You have to really know what you're doing to utilize that, because there are a lot of pathogens that don't show up easily in the stool. In fact, I just wrote a manual on this, how to interpret a stool test correctly, and how to find hidden things in the stool test. Because sometimes, like let's say, for instance, if a person has no friendly flora, if their bifidus and lactobacillus come up on a stool test reading 0, and they have certain other commensal bacteria, particularly Klebsiella and Citrobacter, there's a great chance that person has candida. But the candida is very hard to culture. So when you do a stool test, candida often doesn't show up, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that test is not detecting it. So you have to know what you're doing when it comes to stool tests.
Is there a lab that you might recommend for people looking at that? Is it worth doing?
It's worth doing, but you need to have somebody interpret it who really knows what they're doing. My favorite is Diagnostic and the GI map. That's my favorite of all the stool tests. I use other ones too, but that's my favorite.
Are there any blood tests that you recommend on any routine basis?
Yeah, I would always recommend the standard CBC, WBC, and like a SMAC 24, your basic blood work, because if you know what you're doing, you can pick up a lot from it. I can find cancer trends in those blood tests, and I'm usually pretty accurate with them. But that's not something every doctor can do. You have to have studied people like the ones I quoted before. You have to study someone like Jim Sema, or some of the more avant-garde people who interpret blood work to be able to pick those things up. But that's still a worthwhile thing, because you can find a lot of things on there. I'll give you a couple of hints on that. Uric acid levels being below normal can indicate parasites in your blood. Alkaline phosphatase being below normal can be an indication of adrenal exhaustion. Or it could be a zinc deficiency, because alkaline phosphatase is a zinc-activated enzyme. These are the kinds of things I studied early on when I was studying Ken Brockman's work. And that's why I say I can look at a blood test and I can get 100 times more information out of it than the average medical doctor, because he's not taught these things.
And we're rushed with our patients. You get 10 minutes. You get very little time to get to know them and listen to them and learn from them. And so the practice of medicine is become in and out, and basically, symptoms, maybe a test, and then a drug.
Right.
And
that's accurate. That's accurate. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the cholesterol statin paradigm and the cause of heart disease?
I'm glad you asked me that question. I had someone ask me that this morning. The entire study of cholesterol is based on a study from Framingham, Connecticut, which is called the Framingham study. And the Framingham study showed that cholesterol was bad and that it caused heart disease, allegedly. Years after the Framingham study, researchers went back to take a look at the study again. And what they found something very interesting. The people in Framingham, Connecticut, who were the controls, were given this drink. And the drink had this form of cholesterol in there that was completely insoluble, that an elephant couldn't break down. So that completely invalidates the entire study, although people still refer to the study, and that's still the basis of everything in terms of cholesterol. When you give someone a cholesterol to ingest that cannot be broken down, the study is framed right there. The truth is, your body needs cholesterol. The reason there are doctors out there who tell their patients your cholesterol has to be as low as possible. You kill them if you do. You come to stroke. The Princeton BioCenter showed many years ago that when your cholesterol was below 140, your chance of a stroke dramatically increased. The lower your cholesterol goes, the higher your possibility of a stroke is. because what's happening is a lot of that cholesterol is getting clogged in the sinusoids of the liver. And then when it suddenly breaks free, it gives you a stroke. But most people don't know what cholesterol is. Most people think cholesterol, oh, it's bad. Cholesterol is actually the material that your body uses to transport vitamins. All your fat-soluble vitamins are transported via cholesterol. When your body tries to detoxify, cholesterol is what attracts those toxins and transports them to your liver so they get dumped. Even further than this, cholesterol is what your body uses to make hormones. Cholesterol is converted to pregnenolone. Pregnenolone gets converted to DHEA or cortisol, and then so on down the line. So without cholesterol, you can't make hormones. So that's my short list for people who don't understand the necessary reasons why you have cholesterol. Your liver makes 8 times the amount of cholesterol that you could ever get in your diet. So generally speaking, 80% of all the cholesterol in your body at any given time was made by your liver, not from your diet.
So the premise that cholesterol is the cause of disease is false.
It's the same thing as saying the gravedigger is the cause of death.
Yeah.
Dr. Dunsbach coined that many years ago. The gravedigger is about the cause of death, like cholesterol is the cause of disease. How a plaque forms, most people, well, what's a plaque? Oh, you get cholesterol stuck in your arteries. No, that's not what happens. What happens is you have inflammation and you have oxidative stress, which damages your blood vessel lining. Your body's natural process when that happens is to start producing fibrogen. Fibrogen is the sticky substance that you'll see appear in a cut that you have that's trying to mend the tissue. Mm-hmm. So when your blood vessels are damaged, fibrogen forms. When fibrogen is formed, calcium and other minerals that are coming by get stuck to the fibrogen, and then the cholesterol that comes by gets stuck to the calcium. That's the how would I say, the analysis of an arterial sclerotic plaque. That's how you get that. So the first thing you have to learn is don't allow damage to occur to your blood vessels, and then you won't get the fibrogen that causes the calcium to stick, that causes the cholesterol to stick and block. How you don't do that is by having inflammation. Inflammation is what causes this.
What are your thoughts on fiber, and important to take, to focus on, or is it not?
Well, there was a book years ago called The Save Your Life Diet, and it was written by several doctors. I think it was four different doctors who write for Lancet, the British medical journal. And they had gone to Africa to study these people there because they had heard that the people in Africa never had any bowel disease or any kind of intestinal disease. They wanted to see this for themselves. So they went there and they studied these people. And they found out that not only did these people not have any bowel disease, they didn't have any disease. They had no chronic illness. Now, this was mind-boggling to these guys. They had no chronic, so they looked to see what's different about these people than the people in the West. They immediately found out that these people every day had 4 to 5 bowel movements that were virtually odorless, and had the total correct balance of bacteria. They consumed 24 grams of crude fiber a day, where in the West, British and American people were consuming 2 to 4 grams of fiber a day, and they averaged a bowel movement or less per day. I have patients come and tell me that their bowels are perfectly normal. They go once a week. So and there are so many things you could point out from that just in itself. If you only go once a week, the calories that your intestinal tract is not burning by not having peristalsis will make your metabolism slower. You're not going to absorb nutrients from your food correctly because your intestinal pH is going to swing really alkaline, being that slow. Your tendency to develop candida and other intestinal pathogens goes off the roof, again because of your intestinal pH. There's just so many things that are so bad about that. It makes the person a walking cesspool. But on the other hand, these African people, tribal people, are going 4 to 5 times a day. And they don't have arthritis. They don't have diabetes. They don't have any of these diseases.
Do you think it's singularly the fiber as the cause, or
no, but I think it's a major part, because if they were going to consume seed oils, the seed oils would be in and out of their body faster than Jiminy Quick. So that's a large part of it right there.
The general recommendations are 3 to 6 meals a day, or 3 main meals plus snacks in general in the standard dietary recommendations. What are your thoughts on more meals a day and eating like a grazing animal versus eating one big meal and maybe a snack or two?
I think that's still up for inspection. I'm not convinced either way yet. I personally, for years, worked with a personal trainer who believed in what we call feedings now, where you would eat every 2.5 hours. He would have you eat a protein the size of the palm of your hand, vegetable the size of the palm of your hand, some type of carbohydrate maybe the size of the palm of your hand, and do that every 2.5 hours. And his logic was that this would speed your metabolism up, which I saw that it worked. But on the other hand, I also see that intermittent fasting works on a lot of people. So I would say it's perhaps something that we have to learn more in terms of what's right for a person under certain circumstances. I don't think there's I don't have a yes or no on that yet.
What are your hopes that we see over the next 4 years in the new administration in the United States with Trump?
I just hope that Bobby Kennedy is allowed to speak his piece. If you think about it, what they want to do with the Make America Healthy Again movement is going to slam big food and slam the pharmaceutical industry. Like the big food and the pharmaceutical industry stand to lose billions of dollars because of Trump and Robert Kennedy. Second thing is that if they can carry out their goals, they're going to totally revamp school luncheons so that we don't have the obesity that we have with kids. 1 out of 4 children is obese, I believe, and many are diabetic. When I was a child, having a diabetic kid was like unheard of, totally unheard of. So I'm going to hope that they can get basic rudiments in, explain to people why non-organic food is bad. I'm hoping they're going to work with the farmers, getting the farmers to produce more non-GMO organic food, and they're going to educate the people. Obviously, President Trump has a unique diet. He's got the golden arches happening there, and for all I know, maybe he can handle it, because as the stories you hear about him is he works 18 hours a day, sleeps a couple hours, and he's back up, and nobody can keep up with him, apparently. So he may have a metabolism that's indestructible, and maybe he can handle those foods. I think for the average person, it's been proven. Just go back to, do you remember there was the video Supersize It years ago?
Yep.
Where the fellow took on a challenge of eating nothing but McDonald's for a few months and see how his health was. But after a few months, the doctor told him, if you keep up whatever it is you're doing, you're going to be dead soon. So
yeah, Warren Buffett and Trump both, I think, love to stop and get a Coke at McDonald's. There for sure.
Well, President Trump has that Diet Coke button on his phone on his desk.
Yeah.
If you press the button, they come and bring him a Diet Coke.
What haven't I asked you, or did you want to ask or share with those listening?
What haven't you asked me? That's a good question. You've asked me a lot. I think one of the things that is that people need to investigate more, which is not really brought up as much or talked about as much, as blood type. I was fortunate enough when I was in medical school to have as a teacher Dr. Diadamo Sr. Now, his son, Peter Diadamo, was the one who's written all the books. But I got firsthand from the horse's mouth the value of knowing your blood type. And it's not something which is 100% perfect. It's workable. It's not perfect. But knowing your blood type and using that as a foundation gives you a pretty good start, because there's more truth in that than not. Because it's explaining your genetics. Your blood type is part of your genetics.
Well, it's also interesting. Your blood type is determined by a sugar, and the glycobiome and the sugars on your blood have certain antigenicity to that which you breathe, drink, and eat.
Exactly.
So it does make sense that your blood type would have some factor to this.
It would also make sense based on historical look empirically, that if you come from a bloodline which are farmers, that you would be more apt to eat in that direction as opposed to a bloodline where you're hunter-gatherers. And a simple way to explain it is, imagine taking an Eskimo whose his generations and generations have lived in this cold environment, eating blubber and fish. So now you're going to bring him down to the tropics and you're going to turn him into a vegetarian. Does that make any sense at all? No, I think the average person could see that something's wrong with this picture.
Do you think that beef, red meat should be, or some ruminant meat should be included in the human diet?
Not for a blood type A. For an O, absolutely. All this nonsense about red meat being bad for you, it goes back to what I was saying before about how cholesterol and sugar have been blamed for what seed oils do. Red meat that you buy, a book everyone needs to buy is called Animal Factory. Red meat that we buy in the supermarket is not really the correct thing to eat. It's not even, it's barely even acceptable. Grass-fed meat is a completely different food than the average meat that you buy in the supermarket. Yeah. And when you read David Kirby's book, Animal Factory, he'll explain this to you step by step why this is and how they feed these animals and how it ends up being this way. But when you look at the fatty acid content of grass-fed meat versus average supermarket meat, a single thing you can look at is the ratio of linolenic acid to arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is a fatty acid which promotes heavy inflammation. The red meat in the supermarket is high in arachidonic acid versus linolenic acid. When you look at grass-fed meat, it's totally different. It's anti-inflammatory. It has low in arachidonic acid and high in linoleic acid. Grass-fed meat even is very high in omegas, similar to salmon, where your supermarket meat is not. So when people talk about eating red meat, the first thing I ask them, are you talking about grass-fed or not? Because they're two different animals, no pun intended.
What about fish and poultry?
What's your question specifically?
Should that be included in a healthy human diet?
If it's per your blood type, if you're a blood type B, no, you wouldn't be eating poultry. But in other blood types, yes. But again, go back, shouldn't be not farm raised. They have to, when it comes to these animals that crawl, walk, swim, run, whatever, you have to go back and look at, are they being raised in an environment where it's natural and they're not being turned into chemical experiments.
And so would you say that animals in some form should be included in the human diet?
Well, man is an omnivore. I went back to this. Gary, do you know who Gary Null is?
No, I don't.
No, Gary Null was a very prominent nutritionist at a radio show for years and years and years in New York City. We had this argument a few times, but man is an omnivore. Gary Null is a vegetarian, and he advocates a vegetarian diet. Yet in a book he wrote called The Complete Vegetarian, he explained how man is an omnivore, and man is meant to eat a little bit of everything. And that's the way I see it. I have to go by the facts of science. Man is meant to eat a little bit of everything. That's how our teeth are set up. We're omnivores.
Were we primarily plant eaters or primarily animal eaters?
A little of everything.
Evolution.
Well, that's what an omnivore eats, a little bit of everything, hence the word omni.
Did we cook our meat or eat it raw in our evolution?
That I don't know. I imagine I imagine initially it was raw until we discovered fire.
Yeah, I wonder about a raw vegan diet. Is that healthy for us?
I would say no. And the reason why I'm going to say no is my own experience. But I'm a type O. So what I could say is if you take a type O and you put him on a vegan diet, he's got about maybe 4 or 5 years before he starts developing problems.
Yeah,
this is what happened to me.
I'm an O as a plant eater, deadly. When I went full on meat, best ever. And I rarely eat plants, but I agree we are omnivores. We're capable of eating pretty much anything. And I would say cooked plants and raw meat is probably the healthier things you can do.
I could believe that. Now, when I was a vegan, a friend of mine, also a very close friend of mine who was a jazz pianist, also, we were both doing this vegan thing together. And about the same time, I started getting twitching in my body, and he started having uncontrollable finger spasms. Not a good thing for a pianist to have.
No.
So I went to school the next day, and I asked my teacher, who happened to be Professor Diadamo, about this. And he asked me what my blood type was, and I said, "Well, I don't really know, but I think I think my mother's an O or something." So he said, "I tell you what, this is what I want you and your friends to do. I'm assuming you're O's. I want you to go home and for the next week eat nothing but liver, and then come back next week to class and tell me what happens." We ate this liver twice. All our symptoms were gone that we had for the last 6 months. 2 servings of liver, it was gone. Now, that's a type O. I'm not here promoting people eating liver. What I'm here to tell you is if you're a type O and you're not getting the proper ribonucleic acid from your meat, you're going to end up with nervous system problems.
And certainly eating fatty meat and organ meats are probably healthier than eating purely, we know from lean muscle meat is not the thing you want to eat alone. You want to throw in the fat in the organ meats.
I would agree.
Doctor, any parting wisdom and words that you'd like to leave with and for those listeners?
What I would like to see happen, and this may take 20 years, but the doctor of the future should eventually learn to take the patient and do 2 sets of tests on him. He wants to do a functional set of tests that will tell him what is happening in this person's metabolism right now in real time, how it's running, what his imbalances are, what his deficiencies are. And then he's going to do another set of tests which analyze the person genetically to see what his potential problems are. And people need to keep in mind when they do genetic testing, which is becoming popular, is when you do a genetic test and it says you have this, it doesn't mean that's happening now. That means that's your potential. But when your telemeters are clicking away, that eventually could happen. But it doesn't mean it has to happen. So if I believe a doctor needs to test people in this manner. He needs to do a test to show what's happening with the person in real time, but yet do genetic testing to see what the potential positive points are or errors, and then view the patient from that aspect.
And change the environment, the ecology, the surrounding of our lives in order to make these changes.
That's something, unfortunately, that we have to some degree leave up to our government to do for us. And let's hope they do a much better job than they did in California.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And where can people find you to get more information about what you have to share?
They can go to my website, www.health-truth.com. I have 2 other websites, the New York City Thyroid Doctor and the New York City Candida Doctor.
Well, again, we appreciate you, and we look forward to sharing more about what you're bringing to this world and helping people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.